Another day, another assassination attempt against President Trump, against conservatives broadly speaking. And because I find repetition to be debasing, if you're at all familiar with my content, I like to make singular videos about one topic once and say everything I have to say about that topic and then move on to other things. I don't like repeating myself. The problem with that is now we are fresh out of things to say, because we covered this during the first Trump assassination attempt, the other 15,000 Trump assassination attempts, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the violence throughout the first Trump administration dealing with Antifa, where they even killed somebody, as we will discuss later on in this video. So given that we all kind of know what's going on and we all kind of know also what has to be done, but there is a gap between that where things are still not being done to meaningfully address this, I guess what we can really just do is kind of provide a sense of urgency to Americans who perhaps still don't understand exactly what we're dealing with right now. And so today, I will go over some of the details surrounding this assassination attempt, but also we will be taking a little stroll down memory lane to review some of the more notable instances of left-wing terrorism throughout the past decade or so. Throughout the past several decades or so, we will also provide a better understanding of the psychology behind the types of people who actually do this kind of stuff and the types of people who consume this kind of content. And that is literally just saying CNN, MSNBC, the no innocent Democrat hypothesis. So yes, we will go over who is violent, why they're violent, and why if we don't do something about it like yesterday, we're going to be in a pretty bad position. Do stay tuned. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the John Doyle Show. I saw a poll going around Twitter, which is, I don't know how accurate it is, but it's more or less reflective of what I've observed in my own life. And the poll asks, what is a bigger problem in the U.S. today between the political parties and their, predisposition toward violence? 34% say right-wing violence, 32% say left-wing violence, and a full 34% say they are not sure. Now, if you are at all familiar with how they measure these things, because first of all, that poll is not actually asking about, interpretation of a data set. That is asking about public perception as to which side is more violent. And certainly some of that may be informed by the fact that traditionally speaking, right-wingers are the people who like to go out and march with their guns in public and talk about prying it from their cold, dead hands. This very performative Second Amendment advocacy, which I'm not saying is bad, but that is how the public perceives, perhaps right-wing gun ownership in this kind of peacocking kinds of demonstrations, whereas left-wing gun ownership, to the extent that it exists, was typically concentrated among literal criminals in the inner city, and then perhaps you would see, I don't know, some of the LARP John Brown gun club types who really have only been more in the spotlight in the wake of the Donald Trump administrations. But if you actually look at how these organizations like the SPLC, ADL, when they actually try to aggregate data as to who's committing more violence between left-wingers and right-wingers, you'll have left-wing political violence because you will have left-wing people going out and killing people, blowing things up, burning down buildings, and they will leave behind these little manifestos where they talk about how it's for whatever reason, freaking healthcare, with the Luigi case, just killing some random healthcare CEO because of this vague understanding of the healthcare system being corrupt, man, which maybe we'll do a little segue on that, dude. That was so stupid. That was an IQ test that I watched so many people fail because you had this guy who went and targeted a healthcare CEO. And people were looking at this and they thought it was this epic Dark Knight Rises, Bane uprising against the 1%, which all the way, if you don't understand immediately that if someone's going to be a victim of an assassination and that person is a healthcare CEO, there is no right-wing person on the planet who's going to make that person his first target. The reason for that was because of this vague idea that they're profiting off sickness or what. If you spend more than 5 seconds being aligned with reality, you understand the problem with our healthcare system is not that people can't get treatment because they're sick. It's because it's bloated and it's clogged because you have people who are otherwise healthy and productive subsidizing the extension of life of people who are committed through their own lifestyle habits to killing themselves, whether that's because they eat like crap, they don't move, they're sedentary, they're illegal aliens, they're coming in here with all these weird diseases, clogging up emergency rooms. That is what is going on. That is the transfer of wealth that is making the entire system bloated. So people wanted to say, well, maybe it was because he had a family member who couldn't get the care they wanted, like in the movie Saw, and so he went I'm going to get revenge. Ooh, greedy healthcare guy. It was the stupidest thing ever. And then the guy turned out to be insane and he fried his brain on ayahuasca or something. So that is the kind of thing that we're seeing going on here in terms of left-wing political violence. These insane people with just lack of comprehension of how things actually work. Of course, they are left-wing after all, going and targeting people who are more or less well-to-do in a sense, just avatars of what they perceive to be evil in society, like a healthcare CEO. It's like, give me a break. So anyway, you'll have things like that, which sometimes they are indeed included in these metrics to measure left-wing political violence. Right-wing political violence is literally non-existent. And so what they have to do to fudge the numbers is in right-wing political violence, they include gang activity which takes place in prison. They don't do this, by the way, with black gangs in prison, who I'm sure would align themselves quite openly with a lot of other black organizations outside of prison, likewise committed to these kinds of revolutionary violent causes. But it's only like the white supremacist gangs in prison where, you know, they stab somebody, they get into a fight, they do whatever. Sometimes they do coordinate outside of prison, but typically that is also just killing like other gang members. It's not actually something that is like a vector towards some particular political cause or mission. They're not taking out journalists or anything like that, at least not in the last several decades. But the reason they have to do that, uniquely include the example of prison gangs, is because otherwise there would be no way to make an argument empirically that right-wing political violence even exists, let alone at a scale greater than left-wing political violence. And so, yeah, you'll have like white gangs in prison who have to stick together because in prison that's like sort of the MO, is it not? But then for some reason that standard is uniquely applied to these people who are, you know, skinheads or whatever, so that they can cook the books and claim that outside of that environment in just normal American society, right-wing political violence is actually a problem. This was also pretty insane during the kind of first Trump administration. You know, there was all this talk about the Proud Boys, and what was the other one at the time? There was the Proud Boys, and I remember the didgeridoo video when we went to that Trump protest and we harassed the local media and Trump supporters with a didgeridoo. Fantastic piece of content. When I was at that guy's house, my buddy who had the didgeridoo, to pick him up, dude, his mom was like one of these types of like upper middle class white liberal women who was insane. She pulled me aside and with tears in her eyes told me that she was worried about her son getting radicalized. And I was like, Mrs. So-and-so, like, he's got a didgeridoo. He's just like, we're just shitposting. It's not that deep. And she told me that she's worried. She's like, are there going to be Proud Boys there? And I'm like, what? Like, I'm a Proud. It's like, what do you mean? Like, they're harmless. They're fine. Maybe, probably. I don't know. They just wear the Fred Perry polos. It's not that big of a deal. But she had been radicalized, literally, this like upper middle class PTA mom, into believing that Proud Boys are going to be there just like armed with a gun, just like starting problems for no reason. Then she began crying, confessed that she was severely depressed to me, that she was anxious, it became a therapy session in their like green room. And I was so uncomfortable. I wanted to get to Pennsylvania and I had to like deal with this. And this is a woman who was consuming, I don't know, Pod Save America, NYT podcasts, NPR, again, normal left-wing content, mainstream left-wing content. And this is the conclusion that she was reaching, such that she was confronting me, a 20-year-old, looking for reassurance that the Proud Boys weren't going to be there or whatever. And it's like, what does that mean in your mind? And so that was an interesting dynamic. This woman too, also, by the way, this is like, I still like die laughing at this. She was trying to develop an understanding of the other side, right? So this is sort of like the libtard delusion. She was convinced at this time, 2020, everything's going on. She was like, well, I want to understand what the other side thinks about the world so that maybe I can reach them. It sounds like a pretty good intention, right? Understand kind of where people are coming from. Guess what she read? I'm going to pull it up. Okay, you're not going to believe this. So I've got this image. I'll try to show you. Basically, my buddy texts me and he says, hey, guess what my mom's reading to understand the other side? And I'm like, what? He sends me a picture of their coffee table. I don't know if that's going to focus or you'll be able to see. Essentially, what she's got there is a copy of How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Under that, there is a copy of The Turner Diaries by Andrew MacDonald, which, if you are at all familiar with that particular piece of literature, then this woman is probably now on an FBI watch list. I don't even know where the she got a copy of the Turner Diaries. It is like, that's an actual banned book. The only libtard to ever read an actually banned book. And she does it because she wants to develop a psychology of the average Trump supporter. And instead of reading, I don't know, one of the billion books written about the Trump political cause, watching any of the sort of like Trump aligned media, having a conversation with a Trump supporter, what does she do? she goes and reads what has been labeled as a white nationalist manifesto, dystopian, murder porn, that kind of book or whatever. I, of course, have not read it. I don't even know anything about it. I'm simply saying that is kind of the psychology of the median libtard, where if they're not willing to sign on to this kind of stuff, where it's like, yeah, straight up violence is okay against like Trump supporters or whatever, even if they're not on the streets doing it, in their heart of hearts, they still believe that that is the person being targeted. It is actually the normal Trump supporter is actually like a genocidal white nationalist. And so even if they're not willing to take it there, violence, arrests, like legitimate, with teeth, political persecution, they will sit on the sidelines and they will cry and they will say, ultimately, it has to be done because these people are, genocidal white nationalists simply for voting for a 90s New York Democrat or whatever. So it's just like completely insane. And that is how that kind of stuff comes about with the extremism on social media too. Like those are the incentives that they would like to have people embodying. A lot of times, like the Turner Diaries, for example, you cannot buy that book to my knowledge on mainstream platforms. You could not discuss that book for a while on mainstream platforms. Any kind of extremist content, whether it's conspiracy theories about, child trafficking, elite corruption, that stuff would get you banned in 5 seconds at any point between 2017 and probably 2023. My Twitter account was banned for 3 years. Now I see these trends where all of this extremist content is not only permissible, it's actually promoted. Even if you have neutral algorithms, it will still be suggested to you if you spend 5 seconds consuming any kind of political content. And the reason for that is, as I've been trying to articulate on the show for the past few months, but also I posted about this on Twitter just yesterday in reference to this, because somebody was talking about the manifesto of the Trump assassin this time, where he was, remarking on the Epstein stuff. He was remarking on the pedophilia stuff. And, it was just total radicalization by social media, by mainstream media. And I said, social media became okay with extremist content once they realized that it's less politically beneficial to outright censor it than it is to just editorialize it in the right direction so that people start killing their opposition leaders. And that's absolutely true. How else can you explain that? Why would big tech, media generally, have such a strong commitment to censoring any kind of extremist conspiracy content, and then 5 seconds ago, oops, hands off, I guess you're allowed to? Is it because Trump got back in office? No, because actually censorship, if you may remember, was at its highest when Trump was in office the first time. So why the change? Did they just decide all of a sudden they have some commitment to the truth? No, it's because they understand, exactly as I put, that in terms of scoring points for themselves politically, it's less advantageous to outright censor this kind of stuff. They don't benefit from that, really. They suppress something, people become more curious, they look guilty. What's actually a lot more effective is not only allowing it, promoting it, but putting their thumb on the scale. So they're directing it. They are ultimately in charge of it. They are curating a particular kind of conspiracy content, extremist content, whatever you want to call it. And that ultimately the conclusion being drawn is that we can't support Trump. He's a pedophile, rapist, traitor, and we should kill him. We should kill his supporters, kill his top guys, all of that. That is why that's happening. They can actually take that and kind of get right-wing people to stumble over themselves, trip over their own skis, and then they start basically inciting the assassination of the opposition leaders, all of those kinds of figures. Like, that is why. And I think that ultimately, like we said, too, with the psychology of the average liberal voter, it's all the same thing. They agree in principle that right-wing ideas and right-wing people should not have representation in society. Like, they agree with that. If you have any conversation with one of these people who claims to be so open-minded, try to ask them what an acceptable, iteration of conservatism or right-wing ideas would be. Because they try to lie to you, right? They'll tell you, well, it's just this MAGA stuff. It's just this Trump stuff that we don't like. That's what's crazy. Tell me what's not then. Describe to me what an, adequate, acceptable iteration of right-wing thought, conservative thought. Describe to me what that would be. And don't just make allusions to George Bush had decency, John McCain had decency. Tell me right now, in terms of policy, what is a acceptable pushback to however it is you want the world to be governed? And they can't do it because it doesn't actually exist. So they all agree with that in principle. They believe that in order for society to function properly, right-wing ideas, right-wing people, we cannot have any significant representation culturally, politically. They all believe in that. So then the question is, what's the tool by which to achieve that? The more radical ones who have perhaps followed their ideas to their logical conclusions understand that it's violence And then you have your more moderate types who are reading the Turner Diaries in between their anti-racist books and listening to NPR, sipping their tea. Those types of people agree with removal, but perhaps not through violence. They would agree with removal in terms of censorship, in terms of cutting people off, friends, family. They all do that, right? How many times do we have to complain about that on the right? You know, family members cut us off. We've lost friendships. So all of those people agree with the principle that because you are right-wing, because you hold ideas that are perhaps naughty, you should not have representation in their life. They want distance from you. You should not have representation in the politics. So they all agree with that. The only difference is that one side is maybe willing to stop your heart in the process, and the other side will maybe just look the other way, but still continue to vote for Democrats anyway, right? It's not like these people are seeing the behavior of leftists in the wake of all of these assassination attempts where the popular sentiment is lamenting that it didn't succeed. The wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, lamenting that it wasn't Trump. It's not like they're seeing that behavior and saying, okay, I'm going to take a step back from, you know, this kind of politics. Maybe I'll be an independent. No, they just kind of turn a blind eye to it, assure themselves that the right is just as bad, if not worse, but ultimately they still support the Democrat Party, which is why we advocate for the no innocent Democrat hypothesis. So, yeah, these are not good people, dude. You talk to literally any one of these people long enough, and by the way, you need to, like, give yourself permission to acknowledge that. I'm not Ronald Reagan. I'm not going to do this. Oh, they just know so much that isn't true. If that were the case, they would still have a general quest for knowledge and truth, which you don't find with these people. What you find with them is anxiety at the idea that they could be encountering low status opinions. You ever like talk to these people, like apolitical people, normie types? When you say something that they recognize to be like a naughty idea, do they engage with it or do they get nervous? Literally, like, you know, if you were breaking into the school, like after hours, and you've got that one kid, guys, I don't know if we should be doing this. That's how they react, literally. You talk about anything that's outside of the established parameters with these kinds of people. What do they say? Do they engage with the thought? Do they do anything? No, or do they try to appeal to the hive mind? Can you say that? I think that might be a little problematic. According to whom? According to whom? You can't engage with the thought. You can't even address the words that I'm saying. So at best, they're amoral. At best, they don't really have conviction, and they're just kind of responding to whichever way the winds are blowing throughout society, and that's fine. I think that's more or less human nature. But give me a break that these people are good people who are just misguided, dude. You talk to them about any of the issues that animate them the most. What does it mean? Abortion access. Is it because they have a misunderstanding of the bioethics of personhood? No. You talk to them long enough, and they literally just believe that they should have a right to kill kids. Okay. Democracy, who we are, our values. What does that mean? Are they actually worried about the prospect of like the American representative democracy being threatened by various, I don't know, executive overreach, media manipulation, demagogues? No, what that means is I like it when my ideas succeed and I don't like it when your ideas succeed, which is why even if you win the popular vote, you sweep the swing states, you become a democratically elected sitting president, I am still going to contest this, call you a king, call you a fascist Nazi dictator. Again, all of this is just words being like vomited out into the world, hoping that 1 in every 50,000 of these people takes up a gun and then rushes the White House Correspondents' Dinner like just happened. That is the point of all of this, is to get people killed. They acknowledge it. Their capos acknowledge it. Hassan Piker gets on stage and says, one of us is going to have to do it. You are something. Okay. Yeah, so this is all that stuff. Jimmy Kimmel, even, you know, before the White House Correspondents' Dinner attack, he did a segment on his show where he was like, oh, I'm going to take like footage from this and then I'm going to do like a bit and I'm going to make it look like, oh, just look at this video. Look at what literally ended up happening.
Our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow.
Yeah. So guy wants to get up there and make jokes, which, by the way, it would be one thing if that were happening and say you've got like a particularly unpopular president, okay? And then you've got a guy, late night host, oh, I'm funny, I'm a jester. I'm going to make comments about, what if you were a widow? That'd be one thing if that hadn't like literally almost happened and it was only by the grace of God that the bullet grazed his ear, which people want to say that's staged. I think that is your reaction to seeing a miracle. I think that you cannot conceive of something greater, something supernatural. And so you look at that and you say, it must be fake. Must be fake, because you cannot conceive of the possibility of a miracle, of the fact that maybe it just wasn't Trump's time to die yet. Unfortunately for panicans and unfortunately for the global left. But yeah, dude, like Melania Trump actually was almost a widow, not just that time, but like multiple times, literally just the other night. So it's not that like we're going to tone police jokes or whatever. It's jokes. It's fine. But we understand kind of the game that's being played here, which is that if it actually happened, you would still be celebrating. So it's not like you're just, you know, a turret, giving it to everybody. Like, you have an agenda. You're trying to incite this kind of stuff. You're trying to allow for the American public to understand it, not in a very serious way that may be alarming, but just as a funny, jokey way. And we all kind of want this to happen anyway, don't we? There will be justice. So yeah, on Saturday, just this last Saturday, during the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the event was interrupted when there was a 31-year-old teacher from California who was a Democrat, who was a donor to the Kamala Harris campaign. Literally, his name was Cole Thomas Allen. He charged into the event armed with a shotgun and a handgun and multiple knives. He sprinted past security, and then he went towards the event, and then a firefight broke out between him and the Secret Service, with one of the Secret Service members being shot, but thankfully he was protected by his bulletproof vest. So this Allen character was apprehended. He got an injury to his knee, and then, there were very funny photos of him just on the ground like a dog being subdued by Secret Service patriots. And so as the events transpired, Trump, Vance, and other high-profile figures were escorted out by the Secret Service while attendees were hiding under tables. Stephen Miller was there. Pete Hegseth was there. They were protecting their wives. Erica Kirk was seen leaving the event in tears, saying that she just wants to go home. People were, of course, reacting to that by saying, oh, she made it all about herself. I have no words left to say to these people. But, the manifesto is immediately available. You can look at the points from it. Key points including things like administration officials, not including Kash Patel, are the specific targets of this. He was prioritizing, high-ranking targets to lower targets. And then he said that in order to minimize casualties, he'll be using buckshot rather than slugs because of less penetration through walls. He said that he would still go through most everyone here to get to the targets if it were necessary, on the basis that most people chose to attend the speech that is being, of course, delivered by a pedophile, rapist, and traitor, and therefore they're complicit in this. But, I hope it doesn't come to that. It didn't come to anything, actually. You got, immediately BTFO'd, which is hilarious. And so he said, turning the other cheek is for when you yourself are oppressed. I'm not the person raped in a detention camp. Can we get a status on where he is right now? He's literally raped in a detention camp. It's kind of keck. He said, I'm not the fisherman executed without trial. I'm not a school kid blown up or a child starved or a teenage girl abused by the many criminals in this administration. Turning the other cheek is when someone else is oppressed is not Christian behavior. It's complicity in the oppressor's crimes. I'm no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, traitor to coat my hands with his crimes. Okay, cool, dude. So this is kind of the thing with these assassination attempts. They all have to have a manifesto these days. I'm not saying that that's a new thing exactly, but they always envision the way that this is going to play out to be much more romantic than it is. He's got all of his intellectualizing of these people are all complicit and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. I'll take out dude, you got immediately BTFO'd, immediately. You literally sprinted by. That was your big plan. In the manifesto, he laments how lax the security was, which it was, and that's alarming. And I think the Secret Service should be completely reformed top to bottom. However, your big strategy was just sprinting by about 15 guys with MP7s. And immediately, you got BTFO'd. So you're an idiot. You're a theater kid. And then it's also funny because he begins the manifesto by saying, hello, everyone. This might be a little shocking, so I just want to apologize to anybody whose trust I abused. And it's they think that their manifestos are going to be these epic, badass, I will not sit back and watch, what is it in the Hunger Games? I don't know. The bad guys in the Hunger Games oppress the districts. We will rise. And then what actually happens, you idiot? You get made into a laughing stock. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social immediately, laughing at you, calls you a sick person. But leftists and the retard right began immediately calling this event staged, the moment that it occurred. Every other assassination attempt on President Trump, they've more or less said the same thing. And so we're going to review a lot of these instances of leftist violence. But I did just want to make one final point on that, which is that you have to, as we've been saying, understand the ecosystem that you're contributing to. What these people tell me and why they get so mad at me on the internet all of the time is they tell me, why are you trying to stop me from trying to get the administration to work better? And it's dude, I've never said that, not one time. What I am arguing for is not even just something that I think would be better in terms of morality or, I don't know, diligence or just do. I'm arguing in terms of practicality, which ostensibly is what you're arguing for also. People talk about, we want the Trump administration to be doing better. I suggest perhaps you should make good-hearted criticism when necessary, engage in good faith. Certainly do not align yourself with the stated enemies of the Trump administration who keep trying to kill it. And they say, well, actually, I just want to call him a pedophile, rapist, traitor, and all this other stuff. So it's okay, if the retard right says that Donald Trump is a traitor and a pedophile, then you have the left who says, so true, but have you considered that he's also a rapist? Like, the difference between those kinds of ecosystems are not significant enough that they will not combine, right? So it's not even just that you have a nuance. It's this one thing, which is broadly speaking anti-Trump. And everybody agrees with it, and they all have their own little reasons for it. And despite those differences, which, again, I think are ultimately insignificant because they all export the same result, which is trying to harm the political success of Donald Trump, trying to get him killed, trying to get his supporters killed, his capos killed. It's all the same thing. So that's why I don't buy it when these people are like, dude, we just want you to be better, man. We're criticizing you from the right. It's just because we are more base than you. We just want you to do better, dude. That's why I keep calling you an Israeli slave, pedophile, traitor. I just want what's best for you. And it's like, no, if you're going to insult integrity, clearly we're not on the same page. There's nothing I could do to convince you of my intention, of my intended efficacy, none of that, because you've already decided in your mind that I am an Israeli slave pedophile. So what are we even doing? That is why these people find themselves so comfortable with the left. If they were actually worried about the right being more effective, President Trump being more effective, they would be sitting on our side and they would have their arms crossed and they would say, dude, like, this is kind of stupid. This is not what I signed up for. But you would never waltz over to the opposing bleachers and say, I'm mad because they didn't do 5% of what I wanted, so I'm going to be over here with you guys who do 0% of what I want and actually do worse. You do anti what I want because you want to get me killed and certainly are not going to have mercy on me when you get back in power, which ultimately I am assisting with. This does not compute because it's not supposed to. It is retarded. Hence, colloquially, the retard right. Anyway, we will now go through our little laundry list of assassination attempts, leftist violence, things like that. We have to, of course, start with maybe the most iconic moment in American political history, dare I say. I would advance that, perhaps. Of course, Butler, Pennsylvania, July 2024. You have Thomas Matthew Crooks shooting President Trump in the ear during a campaign rally. He lets off several more shots before being put down like a dog by Secret Service. And then in the process, he killed local firefighter Corey Comparator. Of course, there was the famous imagery of the firefighter uniform being displayed on stage alongside President Trump. President Trump went up to it, and I believe he hugged it, maybe even kissed it. Now, I remember exactly where I was during this assassination attempt. I was sitting at my desk, and I remember scrolling Twitter. I think maybe my dad called me, and we were just refreshing the timeline immediately. This was a very interesting energy, which I thought back to when the Charlie Kirk assassination was going on, and when we were finding all about that news and that happening in those developments, because, you know, this was at a time when it's 2024, everything's going on. People, regardless of what your feelings are right now about Trump and his administration, in 2024, can you at least agree that everybody was kind of on the same page a little bit until, you know, they weren't and they were trying to run like all these other candidates or whatever. But for a time, people were very much, at least broadly speaking, whereas this is not the case now, very much unified behind Trump, very excited about Trump because we'd seen him survive what seemed like the impossible. I mean, forget the impeachment attempts staining his political record in the first administration. Now you've got the arrests, you've got felony indictments, you've got mug shots. He beats every case, and so it seems unstoppable. It seems like you cannot stop this guy from getting back into office. And then you have an instance where all of a sudden there are shots off at a Trump rally. We see him go down. We see that there's blood. And then immediately after, we see him stand up and announce that we have to fight. And it was truly probably, one of the most iconic moments in American political history easily. And that was, of course, executed by a leftist, one of these like Discord mods who became radicalized by this kind of rhetoric, who wanted to take up arms against the sitting president to provide some sense of meaning to his life, some sense of legacy or status or some moment of glory. And then instead, he got immediately BTFO'd, he got one-degged, and he died like a dog. And, God knows where he's at now. But that kind of rhetoric, by the grace of God, did not succeed. But it continued, and it has since continued, and nothing really has been done about it. I mean, even like with the Jimmy Kimmel example, maybe the FCC should get involved. Why not? If a judge strikes it down, whatever, dude. You have to start attacking these people with teeth because they are simply responding to incentives that are created by the media, and the media is allowing all this heavy lifting to be done by the First Amendment, whatever that means. They can do the, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. Yes, you are. We all know the game that's being played. You are trying to get us killed, and so you should suffer consequences for that. But that rhetoric, of course, continued as these people were lamenting that it didn't succeed, that somebody had to do it. And then you had the Mar-A-Lago incident in September of 2024, where you had Ryan Ruth breaching Mar-A-Lago with a firearm, waiting for Trump as he was playing golf and then he was spotted and apprehended by Secret Service. He was this like left-wing, Slava Ukraine activist, and another example of a guy who was not radicalized by like dissident dirtbag left talking points. Ooh, I'm gonna advocate for gay race communism, but I'm also gonna say the word retard. I'm edgy. It's like, that was not what this guy was tuning into. He was literally tuning into MSNBC, CNN, and then he just so happened to be the one guy in however many thousands who are tuning into this to decide he should follow the conclusion of the rhetoric which he's consuming every day. And so, yeah, he was apprehended by Secret Service, but still, too close. It was too close. It was like they used to say, the IRA, right, with Thatcher. They only have to get lucky once. She has to get lucky every time. We have gotten lucky thus far every time, but that kind of luck cannot be depended upon. There needs to be more being done about this. And that's not like a vague pontification. I think we all understand like what that means, but for whatever reason, we've been dragging our feet a little bit. And so, yeah, we need to develop a far greater sense of urgency. This stuff should not be considered normal. The American public does not want this stuff to be considered normal. They would like to see swift reactions to this, something with teeth. It would make them feel far more at ease with their political system, especially when it's a political project that seems to be new, seems to be presenting itself as disruptive. The best thing that can happen to that for its political success and also to minimize future instances of this kind of stuff occurring is if these people were, crushed into the ground and buried and we had statues of Trump erected on top of them. Then you had Mar-a-Lago in February 2026. I'd almost even forgotten about this one. Austin Martin, killed by Secret Service after breaching the property with a shotgun. He was motivated by the Epstein files, which of course was encouraged by people like Thomas Massie, other retard right figures, people who are taking this whole Epstein story and making it into this like big mythology, ultimately used to smear Donald Trump and attack Donald Trump. Whereas if you remember, the only reason Epstein is a household name is because of Donald Trump's Department of Justice. The only reason any of us know about Epstein is because of the connection to Hillary Clinton, prominent Democrats. And if you remember at the time, like we were talking about between 2015 and 2019, every relationship between Trump and Epstein was something where it's like, spare me the photos of them at a party together. Like Epstein was obviously rubbing shoulders with everybody. It was Trump like kicking him out of his golf club. It was Trump like providing assistance to law enforcement to go after Epstein. This was all before he was in power. And so all of the like anti-Trump Epstein vector exists simply to say, okay, well, yes, Donald Trump's federal government went after this guy, but they're not releasing the files like they said we would, like they said they would. Therefore, we have to assume that there's all of this other stuff going on that we just made up in our head. Instead of just like, I don't know, maybe the files are never going to show what you actually think they're going to show because you've allowed for social media to build up this entire mythology, which you're never going to be satisfied by. So anyway, that kind of stuff is promoted, again, not because these people decided 5 seconds ago that they care about the safety of children. They care about, elite corruption. All of that is literally just to stop the political project of Donald Trump. It's the only reason why. You would get banned on social media for talking about Epstein 5 years ago. Now it is the most rewarded topic to cover. Why? Because something's going to be done to protect children? No, because they are trying to make Donald Trump's life as difficult as possible and perhaps even over. Moving on, we have the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Tyler Robinson, of course, this deranged leftist who is dating a transsexual, decided that he was going to take up arms against arch-patriot Charlie Kirk. Unfortunately, he was successful. That was just this last fall. Everything has gotten significantly worse since then. Things have never been more treacherous and incoherent, and we are really feeling the absence more and more every day. This kind of stuff, again, occurred because of media, occurred because of people like Hassan Piker. The chow bell, hey fascist, catch, this kind of like, tee, I did a freaking assassination of Reno, like this like Reddit speak that they all participate in. I am very much looking forward to like seeing this guy's heart stop beating, and I don't actually want to see it. I know that we're all very angry about this. I especially am very angry about this, and I'm not even saying this in a humble sense where I'm like, I will set aside my own bloodlust in terms of justice or for a greater justice delivering. That's not what I mean by this. When I say I don't want to see it happen, it's not because I'm willing to deny myself the pleasure of watching this guy's heart stop beating, which it will, which is going to be hilarious. It's actually more that I don't want anybody to see it happen because there is a glory in that. Like people are talking about, the DOJ is announcing that they're bringing back firing squad for the death penalty, which is something I broadly support. I think it's a more honorable way to die. I think it's certainly more effective and efficient than simply strapping somebody down like an animal and injecting them with chemicals. However, there's also something to be said about men going out on their feet and dogs being put down. I don't want this guy, this kid, as much as I think it would be funny for him to get, executed from a firing squad and to have someone like inscribe on a shell casing, like, hey, catch. And then, I think that would be pretty funny. However, it's not about what I think is funny. I want this person to just be disappeared. That's like how they do it in Japan. He should simply disappear into a room one day and never be seen again. Because if you put him in front of a TV, you put him in front of cameras, you let him go out on his feet, and you shoot him via firing squad, first of all, it's too honorable for him. This person is a rat. He is a rodent. He's disgusting. He's a troon. This person should be taken out in a much less dignified way. He would be among too great company were he to be executed via a firing squad, via gunshot. He does not deserve the same death that he delivered to Charlie Kirk. Now, he deserves to actually have lethal injection. He deserves to be in a room where he is strapped down, and the last things that his eyes experience are blinding fluorescent light, and then the discomfort of a burlap sack, which perhaps has not been cleaned adequately because nobody fucking cares. You're going to be dead in 5 minutes anyway. That is like what he deserves. I don't want there to be images of this person going out on his feet. I don't want leftists to have the ability to make edits of this, to make images of this, graffiti of this. I want them to know that their guy disappeared, went into a room, and that was it. And he died like a dog, like an animal. He was injected with chemicals that were made in a lab that made his heart stop beating, and that was it, and nobody cared. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't glamorous. There were no last words. If there were, there was no one there to hear them because nobody gives a shit. That is what needs to happen to people like this, because there can always be martyrs. There can always be There can always be heroes. Charlie Kirk is a hero. I mean, he literally, objectively speaking, I don't know if there's a better way to die than to be killed by one's enemies. There's no greater compliment in terms of that, right? For this guy to be killed by his enemies, which is to say a bunch of right-wingers celebrating the fact that he was shot, that's almost too dignified for him. I think that he needs something far more bureaucratic, wouldn't you say? That is what has to happen for cases like this. There can't be an opportunity to feel as though you are awarded something, a soldier's death. No, you deserve a dog's death, if even that. Then, of course, you had the Covenant Christian school shooting. This was in March of 2023. This was, of course, the shooting of a Presbyterian Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee, killed 3 children, 3 staff members, and injured 2 other children. And the assailant was a 28-year-old transgender named Audrey Hale. It was a female who believed that she was a male, went by Aiden, and used, I believe it was a Keltec Sub 2000, which, again, very just Reddit firearm choice. I mean, maybe that's in poor taste to mention, but this person was put down by her biological opposites. I remember seeing the photos of the police officers, and they looked like they were on the O-line. And then I looked at the photo of the assailant, and she looked like just you hit shuffle on the human genome. Just these very disgusting-looking people, which, again, their soul radiates through their phenotype, which is why. You saw the manifesto, of course, was detailing this anti-white animosity, anti-American animosity, anti-Christian, all of this kind of sentiment. And, of course, that is the result. They are declaring war against that which is well turned out and beautiful, which, if you had to epitomize, would probably be a school filled with little white Christian children, right? This is the opposite of the pride flag, is it not? The pride flag in the last few years has mainstreamed an iteration, which is far different from maybe the paleo pride flag, where it was just a rainbow. Then you started adding things like, the trans stuff. So you've got a blue stripe, a pink stripe, and a white stripe, which, by the way, the person who designed the transsexual flag included those colors specifically because of their connection to babies, their connection to, little boys, little girls, that kind of like baby blue. And I don't know what you would call that, like kind of like a rose petal pink or something. I don't know. That was exactly why that was included. Now they match it up with the pride flag to, of course, conclude a broader range of identities, because now it's no longer just homosexuals. You have transsexuals as well. Then something interesting happened where they added a black and a brown stripe to that flag. And so now you have representation for gay people, trans people, and then specifically black people who are themselves gay, trans, or what have you. That flag now encompasses every identity which is incapable of producing a white child. And I think that is ultimately kind of the score, is it not? This is not my belief. However, it is the observation about how the regime sort of conducts itself, that there is no greater enemy, nothing that it finds more offensive than just simply normal white American kids. It's as simple as that. There's no greater target in schools, no greater target in propaganda, no greater target pretty much anywhere in society, even in terms of the violence, perhaps. I mean, gang shootings are one thing. Which kids are the ones who are going and being targeted and gunned down in their schools? Even Columbine, dude. You ever go to the Columbine Memorial? I'd researched that just like anybody. You know, the first time you hear about a school shooting, it's like the most disturbing thing ever. And so you read all about it because it's almost so vile that it's fascinating. So I knew everything about the Columbine shooting. I knew everything about all these other shootings. I go skiing in Breckenridge. We got a flight out of Denver. I'm like, oh, dude, let's like stop by Columbine. Like, I've never been there. That's kind of like an interesting, actually sort of like American historical site. I mean, that was something that really affected the national consciousness. And it was, I don't want to compare it to 9/11, but in terms of American households never quite being the same, that was a very traumatic event, especially regionally. I went to the memorial. It was a very beautiful memorial in Littleton, Colorado. It was a very beautiful little town. It was actually kind of a surreal experience. And I'm walking around the memorial, and they've got a section for every student who was killed. So you've got all of these like placards, and they're all inscribed, and they've included in those placards excerpts from the students' writings, which, by the way, actually broke my heart, just in the sense of how introspective American kids used to be, whereas now everybody's like completely stupid. You've got just like random American high school students who were unfortunately targets, maybe not targets, but victims in this tragedy. And they were able to express themselves in ways that suggested like a real experience with life rather than just like media consumption and bed rotting, which is the case now, as we're degenerated. But I remember reading in like something like 90% of all of these students were writing about their relationship with God, their faith in Christ. And it just really, I'd spend so much time reading about the attack and all of this and understanding it for what it was. Never did I understand it as something that seemed to really just be an attack on a particularly wholesome Christian community. And then from there, I mean, you can't unsee that. You know, it's one thing to see the Rachel's Challenge assembly when you're in school and you hear all this stuff about how bullying is wrong and whatever. You don't even understand like what the attack was about in a spiritual sense. You know, it wasn't just like this kind of revenge of the nerds uprising, which of course it always is. You have these like very maladjusted people who become mass shooters. There was an element of it that was specifically waging war against like a wholesome white Christian community. And it was very heartbreaking. So that is always going to be the case with this kind of stuff. You know, nobody goes and shoots up a school in, I don't know, Los Angeles, California, or Baltimore, Maryland. And when they do, it's just other people bringing guns to school, and they get into some kind of violent PvP scenario. And then the media writes about it as though it was a targeted mass shooting. Again, to paint an image of like white Christian gun owners as these like vile, evil people, when of course that's not the case. Disproportionately, mass shooters have been transgender, black, etc. But yeah, I don't know, man. Very disheartening. Then you had, of course, the Annunciation Catholic school shooting. This was actually just in 2025 in August. There was an attack on Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. This took place during a mass and killed 2 children while injuring 28 others. The perpetrator was a 23-year-old male-to-female transgender whose name was Robert Westman, who went by Robin Westman. Posted YouTube videos before the attack with all this like anti-Catholic, anti-Trump sentiment, all this other stuff. This is the vector, dude. These people get radicalized by normal media consumption. When right-wing people get radicalized, what does it lead them to do? Get married younger, Chinese research chemicals, spending more time in the gym, putting themselves out there, introducing themselves to people in their community, doing these kind of like, that is like what right-wing radicalization looks like. And you have to go through several rabbit holes to get there. Left-wing radicalization is just spending too much time watching what is put in front of you. And then you declare war on normal white America in the most disgusting and vile and evil iteration possible every single time. That's what it is. This one's a bit of an old one. We actually covered this when it happened, the murder of Aaron Danielson. So Aaron J. Danielson, he was a right-wing counter-protester and member of Patriot Prayer. This was going on during the riots in Portland, Oregon, and he was murdered on August 29th, 2020. He was killed by an Antifa member, Michael, like Ryanhole or something. He was acting as security for BLM protesters, which if you know how all of this works, basically what happens is whether it's single moms bringing their boys in to be danced upon by transsexual strippers or black people rioting, burning down their own cities, you will have Antifa there doing community safety, community security, which is where they get there and they are armed and they stand in between whoever it is that's doing the thing they're not supposed to be doing rioters, groomers, what have you. They stand with their backs to them, facing the people who are concerned about that conduct. Christians praying, what have you. So, yeah, this guy got gunned down by an Antifa member, was captured on video, and then the guy who killed him was later killed by police in Washington State. And if you remember, there was a Vice News interview at the time. So this guy murdered somebody in cold blood who, by the way, I was reliably informed was an enjoyer of my content at the time. I was given a phone number to reach out to his family, and I called and I left a voicemail and everything. So that was actually like one of the worst things to ever happen because, you know, just personally speaking, you're watching all of this unfold in your country. And, you know, I'm like, 20 years old, trying my best, you know, huffing and puffing and trying to contribute as much as possible to like stopping the destruction of my country. It's able to reach a level where it's resonating with enough people that then I find out that like one of my guys got killed by one of these freaks that I'm trying my best to like basically stop in their tracks. That was really, that was an interesting experience, certainly. And then too, you remember how Vice News covered it. So you've got this guy who's on the run because he murdered somebody in cold blood because he's a disgusting freak. Vice News goes out and they do a filmed interview with him, basically giving him a chance to be his little, you know, martyr activist, LARP revolutionary, whatever he wants to be. Vice News platforms that. They find this guy. Really makes you wonder how they knew where he was. Really makes you wonder how all of these people networked together. So they find this guy. They do an interview with him. They let him have his little, like, LARP bit where he talks about the revolution and how he doesn't regret it and all this other stuff. Then he goes out, suicide by cop mode in a hail of gunfire. And frankly, unfortunately, nobody talks about this guy anymore. So he wasn't a hero. He didn't get to be, you know, his martyr revolutionary. I mean, people talk more about some of these other idiots more than they do this guy. But still, that was an instance where one of our guys, a good, normal white Christian, was gunned down in cold blood by one of these freaks who have been radicalized by mainstream media, and who mainstream media then, yes, Vice News is mainstream media, then goes out and gives them an interview, gives them airtime, doing a bit of gotta handing it to them. It's unbelievable. We can't even get authentic representation of our ideas on mainstream media. They will instead give that airtime to people who kill people who profess our ideas. It's just, I literally would rather, everyone always does like, you know, gay son or thought daughter. That's a fun game to play because there are arguments on both sides, right? If you included into that a third option of journalist, the game wouldn't be fun because the answer would be too obvious. Like, there's no lower form of life than a journalist. I truly believe that. Even a prostitute can be redeemed in some way. A journalist cannot. These people are scum. Of course, then you had the Dallas ICE facility shooting. We covered this as well. This was not too long ago. This was September 2025. You had a left-wing activist, Jan, open fire on an ICE processing facility in Dallas in an attempt to murder our ICE patriots. Only succeeded in killing a detainee and wounding 2 others, which is, again, these people are such clowns, dude. Like, you try to kill, you know, an ICE officer, you end up killing the people who you think are being oppressed by them in the first place. Like, they are. Thank you, God, that our enemies are so ridiculous. Truly, one of the blessings that we have. But he left all of these like anti-ICE writings on the ammunition he used. He had like anti-ICE notes, and then he killed himself following the attack like an idiot. So it's like, again, we are so fortunate that these people are so incompetent, because were they to be more competent and intentional in these kinds of actions, it would certainly be a much uglier situation for us. And yeah, that was recent, but you've got stuff that was older, dude. No one talks about, remember the Congressional baseball shooting? Yet again, you had a leftist activist, a Bernie Sanders campaign volunteer, James Hodgson. He opened fire on a charity congressional baseball game, you know, as they always do, in June of 2017, targeting specifically Republican lawmakers. So he wounded the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise, 4 other people, including Capitol Police officers. This was a guy who's vehemently anti-Trump. He posted all sorts of anti-Republican content on social media prior to the attack, and he was killed by Capitol Police officers on the scene. This is, again, just emblematic. I don't know. Again, I hate repeating myself. I guess we're just trying to stress the fact that this stuff happens all of the time and people forget about it, but it is so unbelievably common. What is the game that we're playing with these people, dude? And this isn't just recently. I mean, I know that we all kind of have a vague inkling of those instances, and we'll do something more on this in the future. The leftist terrorist attacks of the 20th century, Weather Underground, DC bombers, the Pentagon, the Capitol. March 1st, 1971, they were protesting the U.S. invasion of Laos. They bombed a bathroom on the U.S. side of the Capitol, and there were no significant injuries or deaths, you know, caused by the extensive damage. But still, That is why there are metal detectors. That is why there's increased security in federal buildings. It was not intuitive. It was done because leftists went in there and started detonating bombs. Saw the same thing in the Pentagon, May 19th, 1972. In retaliation for the U.S. bombing of Hanoi during the Vietnam War, they go in there and they start blowing stuff up. And similarly, there's no major injuries or deaths, but still substantial damage. There are dozens of bombings perpetrated by militant leftist groups throughout the 60s, throughout the 70s. At its peak, it was something like 5 every day. We will cover this in the future, but that is sort of the ghost of Christmas future if this does not get under control. It never stops. They're never satisfied. They never get what they want and decide to lay down their arms and go back to like smoking pot and shrooning out and doing whatever. These people are violent. They are entropic. That is by nature, and we know that. So that tends to have a compounding effect upon itself. Black Liberation Army, too. Between 1971 and 1972, you had the Black Liberation Army, which was a militant leftist terrorist group and an offshoot of the Black Panthers, consisting primarily of convicts who were radicalized in prison, and they would go and conduct execution-style ambushes on white police officers in cities all across the country. Most notable, perhaps, you had the Harlem murders of NYPD officers Joseph Piagentini, Waverly Jones, as well as Gregory Foster, Rocco Laurie. This is just, how it works, right? It doesn't matter that they're specifically like black nationalists or whatever. It's all the same leftist thing. You can call it black violence. You can call it whatever you want. Ultimately, it is this one amalgamation that is directed specifically against normal white America. And that group in particular is linked to over a dozen cop killings, most of which, of course, were carried out by just taking the officers completely by surprise, shooting them in the back while they were exiting gas stations, leaving so many bullet wounds that the bodies were barely able to be identified. All of that kind of stuff. And nobody talks about it. Nobody has any idea about it. And insofar as people acknowledge the possibility of that kind of violence, they think it's the opposite. They think it's police officers ambushing black people for no reason, leaving those kinds of bullet holes in their bodies, Swiss cheesing them, as it were. Or they think it's Trump supporters doing that, targeting brown bodies, sexual minorities. It's the opposite. So, yeah, it's not a hypocrisy thing. I'm not saying that if only the media were able to report this more accurately, if only they had their facts straight, if only they knew so much that was true as opposed to knowing so much that isn't true. That's not my point. My point is that these people are bad people who are trying to get us all killed. There are a lot of people who are naive in that and thus ally themselves with the bad people who are trying to get us all killed. These people will not stop until we are absent from society. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if that means we all get cut off from our libtard friends, our libtard family members. We don't get to have legitimate congressional representation again, legitimate representation in the national conversation again. I guess we've been there. It's not our first rodeo. The thing is, though, as these people feel more and more that they are being backed into a corner, they only get more violent. Remember, it was during the Nixon presidency that these bombings were reaching their peak. They felt as though they were being pushed into a corner. And despite the fact that people assure me all the time on the internet that Donald Trump is not doing anything for us, well, I guess these people aren't quite getting the memo, are they? Because they are only talking about killing us more. They are only killing us more. They are only trying to kill us more. They are only lamenting when we are not killed more. They are only anticipating, celebrating when we are killed more, even more. So clearly they're not getting the memo. So someone's got to be wrong there. It's either that the people who are fully committed in their entire lives, every fiber of their being is fully committed to the ascent of the global leftist political project, and by extension, the complete annihilation of anybody who is not fully committed to gay race communism. Either those people are just not paying close enough attention to the situation on the ground, or perhaps it is the people who have been wrong about literally everything in the last 10 years, who are maybe not so aligned with what's actually going on now. And then by their lack of alignment, they are only contributing, again, to that big, disgusting ecosystem, that big, disgusting environment, which is designed to get literally all of us killed, our opposition killed, put us in prison, make us broke. Yeah. And guess what? When that happens, when your leadership goes away, whether it's in jail, killed, you don't actually get more effective. Nothing actually rises from the ashes that's going to be more effective now that we've trimmed the fat. No, it's harder to win, actually, when it gets harder to win. I know that might seem crazy. That's like 600 level political theory for you. Take some time to digest that, I guess. But yeah, in any case, the thesis that we are trying to advance here is that there are no innocent Democrats. I am not being divisive in saying that. I am being reality aligned when saying that. You are being reality misaligned when you deny that because of a false sense of charity. Perhaps your beautiful Christian heart is compelling you to ignore what your eyes and ears are telling you. I am not so naive anymore. I have seen too many bad things happen to have such a whimsy about how I view American politics at this point. Call it cynicism, being jaded. I call it reality aligned. Don't you like that? Isn't it nice to be reality aligned? We like being reality aligned because when we're reality aligned, we see things as they are rather for how we would like them to be. We might actually get a little bit closer to solving our problems. I understand we have concerns about the economy, the border, foreign wars, all of that. Let us never get so concerned about all of that that we forget the fact that we are living with people who have been propagandized into foaming at the mouth, salivating at the thought that we would be killed and they would get to put it on coffee mugs. That is what we're dealing with. We can be upset about that. We can regret the fact that something has happened in the last several decades that has propagandized these people to being at that point. Nonetheless, that is where they are, and that is what we are dealing with. So it is not simply difference of opinion. It's not simply knowing so much that is not true. These people have been programmed to have legitimate bloodlust against normal American patriots and anybody who allies themselves with normal American patriots. I'm sure that that can be diminished to some extent when these incentives go away, but in the meantime, that is where we're at right now. And I think that if people really understood that, they would behave a little bit more carefully in terms of how they choose to operate on the right wing. I don't believe that you believe what you are saying, essentially, is my point. I'm calling your bluff. There can be a certain extension of charity which ceases to be charity and instead is just cowardice that you are disguising as charity or rationalizing to yourself as charity. If you really believe the words you're saying about how opposed you are to the left because of the threat that they pose to you, to your family, to our civilization, you certainly would never find yourself allying with them. I can remember going over to the opposite student section at football games and trying to start shit, being an idiot with my friends. But there would be times where we would recognize that that's probably not a good idea to go over there and start shit because we believe that they are actually in opposition to us and we're going to go over there and we're going to get into a fight. It's going to be a problem. We adjusted our behavior to align with that thing that we knew. So the stakes are very low there. We're talking about, a fist fight or something, a suspension. If you really believed what you were saying about the stakes that we face now, where these people are actually trying to kill you and kill your family and erase your God and all of this other stuff, there's not a single scenario where you would ever find yourself over there, because either that means you don't actually believe that they are so threatening to you, or you don't believe that they are so threatening to you specifically. They like you for some reason. You get a pass, even though apparently you're so based and red-pilled. So they hate Trump because he's 75% of the way there, 80% of the way there. They hate him. They want to kill him. But you get to go hang out with them and rub shoulders with them and be friends with them. But you're 100% of the way there? Well, why do you get a pass? That doesn't quite add up. It's because you're wrong. That's why. You are not actually aligned with reality. You are an idiot, a useful idiot. You are so stupid that we're going to have to go back to using Obama-era talking points to explain how the world works to you. I am going to have to dust off my Mark Levin books and explain to you the concept of the useful idiot, because we're still doing this in 2026. It's unbelievable. But anyway, that concludes our very, I don't know. That was kind of an annoying walk down memory lane. I'm not having fun with that. But anyway, we will see you back here on Wednesday to discuss more about things in the world, of course. In the meantime, go to Apple, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Leave us a review with your thoughts. God bless you. God bless America. God bless President Trump. Stay safe out there. We will have more interesting things for you on Wednesday and Friday. I hope you enjoy your next 48 hours.